Welcome everyone. Background behind this webinar is that I've been looking at the design of teams in my assignment in British Telecom, and I've come to realize that we've really only got sort of 2 or 3 different team patterns which are suggested by the likes of SAFe or by the likes of Scrum or whatever. So what I wanted to try and do was to look at what are the alternative patterns. So I've been doing some research in places like the LESS manuals and some of the disciplined agile manuals and some of the backgrounds to try and get some alternative team structures and so on, as to how we could structure teams. So just to give a bit of a recap, if I may, and sorry, but I want to start at the basics, right? So if you think about Scrum, what Scrum talks about is creating a functional team. And what typically happens is that we have a series of people that we pull out of various parts of the business and we put them into what we call an agile team. But you've basically got people who previously were analysts, were previously designers, were previously developers, previously now testers, and now all of a sudden we call them an agile squad or an agile team. But in reality, what we have is, because we've got the workflow in there and they've come in from their various functional disciplines, we end up with a team that's operating in basically in a waterfall within an agile construct. So I've got a lot of teams that I'm been coaching where initially, if we don't do anything about the ways of working, we end up with not a Scrum team, but a mini waterfall team, and they're just doing daily stand-ups effectively, and they're doing the other Scrum ceremonies. But when you actually get inside there, they're still doing the ways of working that they did before they moved into an agile environment, because what we've not done is change their ways of working. So we end up with a mini waterfall. It is efficient because what you do is, all the analysts do all the requirements first, then they pass it to the designers do their designs, and then they pass it to the developers. And it takes quite a long way. Sorry, it takes quite a lot of effort to actually get them out of that way of working and to move into new agile ways of working. In Scrum, they talk about creating a cross-functional team. Well, that's fine. We can create a cross-functional team, but in reality, unless we change their ways of working, we end up with a functional team that is called a squad. So basically what we're trying to do is to get that team backlog, to operate that team as a backlog, and then to pass components of that backlog or work items in that backlog from one activity to another, such that at the end of each sprint we've got the outcome that we design. So the concept in Scrum is that the team has all the skills to deliver the feature. The concept is that we reduce all the delays caused by handoffs. The concept is that the team decides how to work, and as a result it produces outcomes faster, right? That's the fundamental, if you like, underlying principle that is within Scrum. But my question would be, how does the team know how to work if we don't tell it? How does the team know how to behave if we don't tell it? Because Scrum theory doesn't give us very much about the ways of working. If you talk about testing or whatever, it doesn't give us quite a lot about that. And if you talk about the flow within the team and the roles and responsibilities and all of those sort of things, Scrum doesn't give us anything in that space either. So Scrum is only a part of the story, and as coaches what we have to do is start to think about different constructs. Okay, so how could we organize? There's very clear guidance in LESS and in some of the original works around lean agile software development, that we talk about organizing the team around the value stream. So we have a value stream. Let's say we buy I don't know, buy a pair of boots to go walking in the fells. The company checks whether it's got stock. They validate that I'm a customer that can pay. They take the inventory out and they ship it to me. So there's a value stream, if you like, an operational value stream. And then we put development value streams to be able to support that. So this gives us a construct that says instead of the team forming around a single product, what we've got is a process or a value stream that most of the teams are designed to support. So instead of a group defining the work to suit the team, so what we do is we have a team which is supporting the value stream, and then you take work from the value stream. In other words, say they want to improve, I don't know, credit worthiness checking of me buying my boots, then they might give that to the team and say, here guys, go and find out a better way of doing credit worthiness checking, or checking that we've got enough stock, or whatever it is. So the definition of work that we're talking about there, and the identification of the requirements in Scrum is given to what we would call a product owner. That product owner is supposed to be able to break down the work, is supposed to be able to prioritize that work and give it to the team, or allow the team to take work off the backlog in a controlled way. We have a role called a Scrum Master, and that Scrum Master, or the team coach as it's called within disciplined Agile, is the concern of that coach is the efficiency of the team. So we've got a team construct which has, if you like, three main categories: the product owner, the developers, which is what the current Scrum guide calls it, and the Scrum Master. So we've got those three elements, and I think whatever way we construct the team, we're going to have those three elements, and I'd like to just look a little bit at the construct of that in a second. The other thing I found when I dug into the real pith of the research, there's a lot of mythology around Dunbar's number. You know, you hear the guys in SAFE saying, you know, SAFE is designed for teams of between 50 and 125 people because of Dunbar's number. And you hear that the Scrum teams are limited to 7 plus or minus 2, or now less than 10, because of Dunbar's numbers. I've actually gone back into what Dunbar wrote, and in fact Dunbar is talking about social relationships. He's an anthropologist, and he's talking about the social relationships and saying that you can only have, or individuals in history only have sort of 15 meaningful relationships because of the time it takes us as individuals to maintain those relationships. Now, the interesting thing is, from my perspective, when you get inside a team, that investment in time to develop those relationships happens, you know, once at the beginning, and after that, then the team processes and everything else that carries on actually maintains those relationships. And it's not like me having to phone my best mate Adrian to say, here, let's go for a beer on Thursday. This relationship is continual. So first of all, I would say to you that Dunbar's numbers are all based about anthropology, and I think the working practices are slightly different. He did come up with a mean group size for communities, and these, he goes back to sort of like ancient Britons or tribes in the Amazon or African tribes, and saying that the village size is roughly 150 people. And the reason why communities stay together is because they can support each other in what would be fairly prehistoric or mundane, you know, the environment in which they live. They need to support each other in a constructive way. So that cohesion isn't necessarily the same thing that we have to do in a business sense. So I think that, you know, our focus and our fixation on Dunbar's number is not so important as making sure that we construct the teams to align with the value stream and deliver value. So I definitely think that I'm coaching teams, you know, of 20 or 30 people, and you know, there is a temptation to say, ooh, that should be 2 or 3 scrum teams. The impact of having a slightly bigger scrum team is that you can't get through a daily stand-up in 15 minutes, right? So there is some impact in having a bigger team, but it's literally only how long things take to do rather than the social relationships and so on. When you come to mega teams or big teams, you know, the safe-like teams, I think that it's more about what organizing the amount of people around the feature that's got to be developed. And if you need a team of 20 people to develop the feature because of its complexity or because of its technology or whatever, then I think you can probably do it. And I don't think we need to force ourselves into this scrum size of less than 10, or the bandwidth of between, you know, 50 and 25 people. If you look outside Safe and Scrum, then, you know, Less, Nexus, Scrum at Scale are all using that Scrum piece as the Lego brick. So again, you can start to think about, okay, how do we construct a team such that we can deliver value? And then we get to a question, okay, what about, you know, teams that need a specialist, but not for a permanent person within the team? So if we go back to Scrum's basic construct of a Scrum Master, a product owner, and a team member, we're talking about that number as being 10, you know, people, less than 10 according to the Scrum Guide. I think you can go rather bigger depending on your requirements. But those are the people that would be operating using the plan, do, check, act approach of Scrum, right? But in addition to that, teams sometimes need additional players. Those additional players may be a lawyer, it could be a technical architect, it could be somebody from marketing, it could be a project manager or two, it could be a whole host of specialized skills. You know, I've got one team where they're for 2 or 3 sprints, they're going to work with an artificial intelligence specialist, and then that person can step outside the team. So what Disciplined Agile suggests is that you have core teams, and those core teams plan their work in sprints and all the rest of it, but then they call on additional resources or specializations as they are needed. And that gives us a bit more of a flexibility about the construct of the team, because it means that not everybody, okay, if you need somebody dedicated for the whole life of the activity, then of course they're going to be part of the core team. But you wouldn't use, for example, a business architect as a permanent member of the team. You wouldn't use a lawyer. You might not use an accountant. If this was a transformation team rather than a software development team, you could have HR specialists and all sorts of people in this secondary team, and your team just plans its work and then draws the people out of the specialization area as and when they need them. I think this works. I think this is a way of doing the work without saying that you've got to have everybody inside the Scrum team. The other thing which seems to be a bit of a, if you like, differences between the methodologies, between the frameworks, is the question of, is the Scrum Master inside or outside of the team? If you look at SAFE, they say that a Scrum Master can manage 2 or 3 teams. Okay, but the product owner would be embedded in the team. If you look at Less says that the product owner is across all the teams, but the Scrum Master is sat in the team. So you've got differences of approach according to the type of framework that you're using, or the type of backbone that the organization is using and requesting you to use. Or is this something that you might consider as a coach, whether you've got alternatives here? For example, you know, if you've got very few. If you've got a very good developer in the team, is the Scrum Master a hat that is worn by a developer or tester, or is it really an FTE? Because if you look at the average, if you take the Scrum ceremonies alone from the work of the Scrum Master, and bearing in mind every team member is involved in every one of the Scrum ceremonies, then the actual, on a 2-week sprint, it's about 2 days of work. If it's about 3-week sprint, it's about 3 days of work, right? So what is the guy, if you've got a 3-week sprint, you've got 15 working days, you've used 3 days of doing Scrum events. So what does the Scrum Master do for the remaining 12 days? Okay. Now, if you've got a novice team, then the Scrum Master might be doing all sorts of things like, making sure everything's happening and clearing up after the team and so on. But if you've got a team that's 2 or 3, 4 sprints in, then that Scrum Master role would be back down to that, 3 days in 15, and therefore you can start to think about, okay, is this an effective use of Scrum Master, or do you take the safe approach and make a Scrum Master across 3 or 4 teams, or 2 or 3 teams rather, or do you need to construct it differently? If your product is incredibly complex, let's say these teams were working in a exploratory agile, then the product owner will probably be embedded in the team, because the team is discovering every sprint. The product owner would need to keep their arms around what's happening. The product owner would want to see what the feedback the team is getting from customers or stakeholders or wherever they're getting their feedback from, and then adjust the product backlog accordingly. I think in many of my teams I'm coaching in both in British Telecom and my previous role, I found that product owner role is pivotal in the whole efficiency of the team, if you like. So what we've got is the product owner is not refining the backlog to a sufficient level of detail. The product owner is not preparing the work for them. When you get to activity slicing or sizing of work items, they're struggling. So if the product owner actually is in the team, then they're getting a lot more visibility of what is causing the team problems and so on. So the Scrum Master in those instances will be saying to the product owner, look, the size of your work items is too big, it's causing the team to slow down. We should therefore think about how we can break this work up in a different way, and so on. So I think that there, even with the Scrum concept and the Scrum staffing, Scrum Master, product owner, and team member, there are ways that you might want to change the team design according to the requirements and the context of the team. I don't think one team design suits all, bearing in mind the context of the projects that you're working with. Okay. So I think that there's some flexibility, even if you're thinking of 10 plus 7 plus or minus 2, a Scrum team. I think there's some flexibility when you're starting to look at bigger teams and so on. Any questions?
Presently, no.
Okay, thank you. So I think going back to this, aligning the team to the features, I think what you will find is that customer-centric features, not all teams are able to produce work with customer-centric features. I've done some research into the Google environment, which is always quoted as being, the epitome of agile-ness, if you like, across the world. And when you dig into that, not every team in Google is customer focused. What some teams are doing are producing tools and components, and for example, the widget for Google Maps, embedding that in other Google features, that map, maintaining that map functionality is the subject of a team. You've got, Google Translate. Those are a widget that is pulled into various searches and so on. So not all teams are external customer focused or stakeholder focused. Some teams deliver to other teams, and those teams are their customers. So we need to look at how we design our organization so that we minimize the waste caused by handoffs, waitings, work in progress, and so on. And aligning people with what they are delivering and the value that they are creating is intended to accelerate time to market and is intended to allow the organization to scale. Those are questions as well as statements, because when you start to look at, okay, we've got this team construct, when we're starting to do retrospectives and look at how can we improve the efficiency, then to think that you've got to stay with the team constructed in the same way, especially if you're dealing with big teams, is probably a bit of a fallacy. When we do our inspect and adapt type thing in SAFe, that's tends to be looking at the product and so on. But are we really looking at the delivery efficiency? If you're doing retrospectives in a Scrum team, they will only be looking at the one team. They won't be looking outside. So it's a coach's responsibility to start to think about, how have we got a design which is accelerating our time to market? And have we got a design which will allow the organization to scale if that's what we need to do? It may not be. Not all organizations need to scale. In fact, we all know that the first rule of scaling Agile is don't, right? So I think that, when we start to think about how do we deal with the way in which we construct the work going through the value stream, if you like, the delivery value stream, we've got to think about these pieces. Now, although constantly changing the individual members of a team structure slows work down, because people have to learn the ways that this team is working and how they have the team that they've joined and the scope and so on, but actually moving the blocks around and moving the work content in a different way through the same teams, I think is something that we can consider without fear about the inefficiencies of changing the teams. Although, at some point you might need to change it, because if you find that I was doing some work with they were a hostel booking company in Ireland. They found that they had too many dependencies going between two teams, and during the when you get to the end of the first day in big room planning, there was too many red bits of string on the board between these two teams, and so the decision was made to actually merge the two teams there and then in order to reduce the dependencies and ease the planning and control. It's kind of interesting because it seemed to deflate both groups of people, because I don't think they expected that the management would be in the problem solving time deciding that they were going to construct the teams differently. And I think it's probably something that the product owners should have been aware of before they got into big room planning. But I think that's a illustration of the product owners not really preparing the backlog to a sufficient degree. Anybody else met that problem?
I think it's a continual problem. Yes, it's just a continual problem that I face I'm a project manager and face it on a daily basis, basically.
What, the team construct is slowing it down, Claire?
No, the product owner, or even if there's a function there, so the requirements aren't broken down sufficiently, which really slows the teams down. Yeah,
and it's how are you solving that? What I use is evidence-based management. I sort of collect some data to say, look, our slower, smaller pieces of work go through the pipeline faster, so therefore we could, if we break it down faster, we'll get through. Using the flow argument, basically.
I think I just try to coach as I'm going, because usually the milestones change and all sorts of good stuff. So I think it just, in our organisation, it rests on the project manager making sure that we just do it on the fly. So yeah, it's getting better. It's just requires a lot of support and cat herding, to be honest, at the moment.
Yeah. No, I understand that. I think product owner skill sets, are underestimated, and the impact of poor product owning, if I can use that term, is underestimated as well by many organizations. So I've gone into quite a lot of firms where they've said, we've got this agile squad, will you go and coach it? We've got a scrum master, but we haven't got a product owner. And they just completely miss that the pivotal role is not the scrum master, but the product owner. And they think because they've got a daily stand-up that they're agile, and they simply won't be.
Well, that's so true as well.
It's sort of, yeah.
Yes.
Everybody else? No, all quiet on the Western Front.
Sounds like it's working perfectly with everybody else, and let me join your organisations.
Good point, Claire. Yeah. Ash, what have you got? What have you found with product owners, mate?
Hey, John, sorry, could you just repeat the question?
Yeah. Okay. What we're talking about, the product owners slowing down the delivery and not preparing the backlog with enough detail. Are you hitting that problem?
I have done when I was working with TK Maxx, I had that problem. Basically where, bit like what you just said, John, right? Like where people come on board, but you don't really, they got a product owner from the business who wasn't really, hadn't had any experience or exposure as what a PO does. So they're coming into this role where they don't understand what their role is, what they need to be doing, how do they need to be breaking down those stories or prioritizing those stories, shall I say, with the teams and helping the teams to sort of like unblock. So there's a lot of coaching had to be done to the POs about what that particular role is and how crucial it is to the organization, right?
Yeah.
To make sure that we can get those priorities right. Otherwise, you're just going to go down a rabbit hole, right? Literally.
Yeah.
I
found one organization I was working with, excuse me, about 3 or 4 months ago, they were saying that the product owners was an IT role, and they completely missed the fact that it's, the product owner role is the bridge between the software team and the business, right? And they completely missed that, and they didn't realize that. They just thought that, okay, we're an agile team, we're a software development team, therefore we'll continue with everything inside the technology, if you like, the technology park. And really they've missed the fact that the agile is about getting closer to the customers.
Exactly, yes. And I've got a similar problem at the moment in Roche, actually, because over here it's a different problem. So there was a team that was responsible for building the MVP, and they had a product owner and they had an agile team working on the product. And then they decided that, okay, now we're going to be sort of like scaling up, and we're going to, because this is an enterprise solution across the whole organization, we're going to bring in 4 or 5 agile teams now, and we're going to go down this SAFe concept and start using the SAFe framework. But there was no training given to the POs about what their new role looks like in the world of SAFe. So you had a product manager, the product owners are fighting the PMs because the PMs saying that I own the priority, the POs are arguing that no, I'm the product owner on the team, I need to own the priorities. So again, it was a case of getting those guys together to say that you guys need to work together and work with your stakeholders to work out what is your priorities that you want to be bringing into your PI planning, right? So when you're talking about your features, your top 10 features and things. So it's quite interesting, like how people, it's definitely worth giving them coaching when it comes, because otherwise they don't know their role, and that becomes a very big bottleneck, right?
Yeah. No, it's interesting what you say, because I think, when you when you start to get product owners, and I think this is, of course, to a degree, it's about your design as well, because you need to make sure that the product owners are getting their act together before you get into bigger and planning in particular, because of the amount of work and the amount of investment in terms of person hours that you're putting in that bigger and planning event, right? I mean, the one that I talked to you about in Ireland, we had 150 people in Dublin and we had another 125 in Porto in Portugal. You know, you multiply those people up, that's 300 odd man days just per day. There's 2 days there without the prep work that each of the teams have done. So you need to have made sure that it's not just getting a design, it's making sure that people understand what their role is in that design. Yeah.
Exactly. I think that's
otherwise, you know, you've got some stuff on paper, but you haven't got very far at all with it. Okay, so parking that for a minute. So what I've done is I've explored the size of the team. Maybe we can be more flexible with the size of the team. I've explored whether we can have a secondary team and a primary team and how that could work. You might want to think about how the team identifies when they're going to need specialists, because if they're working on 2-week sprints, if you're calling out a specialist, you might want to think about whether they need to look at the requirements for specialists in the next sprint and the next but one and the one after that, in order to give those specialists enough diary time to actually be available when the squad needs them. All right. I've also talked about the fact whether you have, you know, the key roles as product owner or the scrum master actually inside the team or outside the team, and context will decide that, right? If you've got an incredibly complicated team, Ash just mentioned, you know, producing an MVP, and an MVP is normally around exploration or invention. Whereas when you start to roll out, then you move away from that type of thing. So if you're in exploration mode and exploratory team, then you might be embedding the product owners or the actually in the team itself. What I'd like to look at is the end-to-end workflow, because the team design needs to think about the end-to-end workflow and how we are going to make the delivery value stream as effective as possible. Now, when we've got a single team, we can probably optimize that value stream very easily, provided that the tools are available and the techniques are available to the single Agile Scrum team or Kanban team. Typically what happens is on the left hand side you've got the product requests, and that might be the product owners defining the requirements, or and basically things get into a prioritized business backlog, and then the team pulls off that backlog to create the team backlog, which they use in the sprint, right? And then at the end of the sprint they will go back to the product backlog and pull more items off it. So that's basically the process that we would be operating, but we'll need to get inside that Agile team, as I was talking to you about right at the beginning, to make sure that the work that's going on there, when not all organizations have T-shaped individuals, and T-shaped individuals are really quite an idealistic Agile concept that many people have grown up being a tester or a developer or a designer or a business analyst or whatever, and then when they suddenly asked to do other things in a Scrum team, they get very confused, and also they think about their training, they think about their career paths, and there's a whole load of interpersonal skill things that are going on in that environment. Okay. So we can look at that, but then when we're starting to design multiple teams, then you've got, you know, this is your safe environment, if you like, or it could be a less environment, or indeed Scrum at scale. So what you've got then is you've got something slightly differently. Now you've got teams producing things from the same prioritized business backlog, and then they are producing stuff. So every 2-3 weeks they produce, you know, working tested software, but at some point you've got to design how you're going to integrate that. Now that some point could be you produce a master team that actually integrates everything for everybody else, or it could be a separate integration function. So if you look at the Nexus framework, you have the integration team, which is like a little bubble on the side. You could do that. You could have the teams automated the continuous integration, and indeed that will probably be where you want to go to. But at the beginning, at least, you're nearly always finding that, you know, teams aren't very well equipped, or organizations aren't very well equipped with sophisticated automated testing. And so you need to, when you're taking into account your design, you don't only need to think about how work gets to the team through the backlog prioritization process and then the team backlog prioritization. You need to think about how the outputs actually get out to the customers. Okay, so this is another input that you need to take into account when you're designing your team. Shout if you've got questions. Okay, there's another bit of writing. There's quite a lot of writing about the component teams are bad things. I think in the SAFe manual there's particularly a lot of, or the SAFe framework stuff, there's a lot about the negative impact of component teams. The fact is that most organizations do have component teams. They might call them something else. They might be tool teams or enabling teams, or there could be a lot of different types of language used. But basically what they're saying is these are teams that deliver things to feature teams, and the feature teams bolt components together in order to deliver the solution to the customer. You know, if you're doing a simple web app or a simple phone on the iPhone app or a handheld app, then you might not need component teams. But believe me, if you're doing like I am with, you know, trying to move 1,400 telephone exchanges, physical telephone exchanges, into the cloud, you have component teams. And if you look at anything that's a real large scale and real complexity, you tend to have teams that are architected. They architect components or tools. They work with those tools, they support those tools, and then they provide those tools to the feature teams or to the teams that are customer facing. So basically those component teams have to respond to the demands that are coming from the feature teams. They have to prioritize their work. They have to deliver their work in a sequence, in a way that it can be consumed and in a timely manner for the feature teams to use. So when you're starting to think about how your teams are going to be organized, if you've got feature teams, then you need to design how they are going to go forward. Okay, and you need to think about how they're going to work, how they're going to achieve the outcomes which are needed. So let's just look at a program at the moment. If you have a program, this could be a SAFe program where you've got a program team, you know, you've got the RTE, you've got a product manager, you might have an architect in there or some other team member, but basically the program team orchestrates the other teams to deliver. They may produce some high-level designs, they may coordinate and control the delivery, right? Then you've got feature teams. Now those feature teams, you might have several of those, and those teams need to work and work together. So you get that integration piece that we were just looking at when you've got those feature teams. So you would need to think about how those teams are going to work. You might have what Les calls a area product owner in the feature team. You might have end-to-end designers in that feature teams. You might have Scrum Master. You will have a Scrum Master in there. You might have a solution tester in there. Okay, so basically you would need to think about how you're constructing that team. It's not just, you see, it's not just when you get to programs, it's not just the 3 Scrum roles, it's bigger than this. So you need to think about the roles and responsibilities and making sure you've got the right people in the right places to enable a feature team to operate. And bearing in mind a program could have several feature teams involved, and indeed some of those feature teams may have components that are being delivered into them. So you'll need to look, when you're looking at your team design, you're going to need to look at how everything is getting coordinated between the component levels, the feature levels, and the program levels. Okay, and just doing a big room planning doesn't always get there. Okay, and also you might find that some of those component teams are third-party suppliers. You might find that some of the feature teams are third-party suppliers. So when you're starting to think about, because most people look at COTS type packages, and a team might be configuring, but they still might need some delivery from a supplier or a third-party software house. So you're going to have to think about how your team design reflects the context of the organization. And there's a very you need to think about whether they are all located in the same time zone. If they're all located in the same building, if they're located in different buildings, then your design might need to change. If they're located in different time zones, your design might need to change. If there are commercial relationships between the team members and the component teams and so on, your design might need to change. So if you're doing third parties, you might need to have a much more detailed requirements spec than if you've got an in-house team that's developing it, because at some point you're going to get procurement involved, and at some point somebody's going to want to say, why are we paying this organization for this amount? And you're going to need to control that, and you're going to need to test what is delivered coming back into the organization. So when you're starting to think about your design, you need to think about not just scrum teams and so on, but also the commercial reality of where you are, and also the geographic reality of where you are. I mean, we're working at the moment with teams based in India, and they're, I think, 5.5 hours ahead of us. So holding meetings at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, or 5 o'clock in the afternoon, most people in India are home and finished work by that time. So you're going to have to think about how you would coordinate that team. You'd have to define core working hours and all of those sort of things, and that has to be part of your design, right? Because if you just let that happen by chance, then the things will be out of control. So alternatives to everybody being in the same space. The obvious way that many agile at scale frameworks manage this is by using big room planning. The big room planning approach is very evident in SAFe. They call it PI planning. Big room planning is also very evident in Scrum at Scale. Less takes more representatives of teams, but they still get together in a larger room to plan across the team. So I'm calling that big room planning. The other thing you might need to think about is if you're using a SAFe environment. I've got some teams at the moment that in my world that have a very stable backlog. The product is stable, and they're able to predict what they're likely to produce over the next quarter, because basically PI planning is what you can produce in the next quarter. So some people call them quarterly wave planning. But in my environment at the moment, the backlog is quite dynamic. So I've got within my teams that I'm working with at the moment, I've got the teams that actually implemented the emergency services network, and they had no idea 2 years ago that they were going to have to implement 14 new COVID Nightingale hospitals, yet they did it. They didn't know that everybody was going to be working from home. So all of a sudden, certain parts of the network were constrained by capacity, and we had to change it so that people could work from home. They didn't realize that they would need some more secure networks that some organizations like banks needed to implement in people's houses, because the traders and the various other people in the banks were working from home. So my teams, that backlog is quite dynamic, and that means that I can't use a big room planning construct. I need to use something where they're doing almost like a backlog refresh every, in my case, they're doing it every month, but it could go down to every 2 weeks. So there is different ways that you'd need to think about how you can collaborate between the teams, how you can synchronize, and you'll need to use a common cadence. By cadence, I mean everybody working on the same sprint length, so 2 weeks, 4 weeks, or whatever. Or you could use a divisor cadence, and that divisor cadence is, you know, if you've got the overall program is working on a 4-week sprint cycle, then you could have teams working inside that program with a 1 week, a 2 week sprint cycle, but you couldn't have it with a 3-week sprint cycle, because otherwise when you get to the end of the sprint, you've got a team which hasn't finished its work, it's mid-sprint. So that's what we mean by a divisor cadence. And also what you can do is to use the Kanban to visualize the work and see where the work is flowing, to give you some ideas about how long things are taking and so on. That Kanban process, by the way, you know, if you look at the way in which SAFe does the backlog management with the program board, and the red bits are sticky. Now, obviously, we're not doing that now. So what teams are doing is doing this on a Kanban. That gives us a much better control mechanism, and I think there'll be quite a lot of companies that wouldn't want to go back to the physical board, but still contain, or even if they did the physical board because everybody's in the same room, then they might migrate it into some form of program Kanban board. But the beauty about the program Kanban board is that it actually gives you the metrics and the control means to be able to measure, and give you the data for you as a coach to say, is this good enough or not, or can we improve the effectiveness or something of this. The other way to do it is to use ambassadors. Now, ambassadors are, you know, you get the people going around the US envoy to whatever it is country, and the Middle East is probably a good one to example, because most people know about the problems in the Middle East, and basically ambassadors fly between countries to try and resolve particular problems or conflicts or supplies of medical aid or whatever it is. So basically you can use ambassadors to fly between teams, just in the same way as countries use ambassadors to fly between countries. And this ensures that you've got the two teams or more teams synchronized. So they'll be involved in planning for both teams, and they'll ensure that the activities are aligned and they reduce delays. Now, obviously, in a software environment, that ambassador role needs to be somebody with a fair degree of technical nous, because they'll need to understand the implications of what each of the teams are telling them and so on. If you were doing a transformation and it was, you know, people change piece, then you might want to think about that might be a HR specialist that is looking at the impacts on people, the impacts on culture, the impacts on job loss or job creation, all of those sort of things. So the ambassador, if you're going to use ambassadors, you're going to need to think about the skill sets that you're going to need to use in an ambassador scenario. The next one I kind of like, and the third method is called travelers. Now, travelers are used when you've got maybe a component team and you're trying to link it with a feature team. So basically, let's say we've got a widget team, right? So the traveler person would be still a member of the widget team, and they would also go to, if you say that widget is used in order processing, so they would also go to the order processing team. So for the period of time for their secondment, while they're trying to produce the widget for the order processing team, they would attend the order processing team stand-ups and their home team stand-ups, so that they can coordinate the activities going between the two teams. Typically, a traveler in a component team would be product owner type role, because they would need to take the requirements into the component team and also make the commitments in terms of the prioritization and backlog. So that method 3 I quite like. It's low cost. It's quite high impact in terms of making sure that we've got both teams operating efficiently, both the widget team and the order processing team. And I quite like that as a mechanism to deal with it. And it means that you don't necessarily have to get everybody into the big room planning event. you know, which is incredibly expensive when you look at it. But if you can get, I mean, if you can get more efficiency by doing big room planning, then don't be frightened of the cost, because, you know, there is some stuff on the SAFE website about, you know, the average cost of a big room planning event is something like 2% of cost, and if you can get more than 2% efficiency, then it's paid back. So you've got that type of mentality, but I think there are other ways of addressing this, and I've given you two here. There's also, obviously, you can use ad hoc methods, you can use tools, you can use meetings. I'd hate to get, you know, to a point where agile teams are coordinated using email, but for certain things you could do that and document, you know, like you would do the you know, traditional project management approach, saying you said you were going to deliver on Friday the 3rd and now you're telling me it's going to be the following week, you know, that type of approach. So you could also use some of the frameworks, the type of approach that you would get the teams to do a call and talk about things. You could get teams to coordinate by demonstration, so they could do a sort of combined sprint review or inspect and adapt, or solution review. So there are different ways that you could do, but it would largely depend. And this is what I'm trying to, if you like, really get over to you, is I think the ways in which the teams operate together nearly always depends upon the context in which the team operates. Okay, so the context of what the team is trying to achieve. So I think, you know, because people have attended the SAFE qualifications and they're certified in SAFE, because people have gone to Scrum and got certified in that, they think that's the only way of doing things. What I'm trying to do in this webinar, if you like, is to open the book to say, is there other things that we could do in the same way? So when you're starting to think about your team design, let's think about organizing around value. Let's not necessarily think about the you know, functionality or the technology. Let's think about how we're driving value. And at the beginning, you might find that the technology and the platforms actually dictate your organizational design. But as you remove those platform issues, you know, the Conway's law and things like this, where you get complexities in the systems reflecting the complexities in the organization. If you're simplifying the organizations and changing the tool set, then you might well get new team opportunities for changing the team design. Design is definitely there to minimize the impact of dependencies. What you don't want is a design that insists that everything has to go through a bottleneck, like a coordinated team test environment or something like this. So you need to think about how you deal with that. The design needs to enable coordination between teams. If you've got multiple teams, you need to think about how do the product owners stay aligned, so that the product that they produce at the end, or the several teams produce, actually mirrors what the customer needs. And sometimes you get the need for designing things like product owner syncs and things like that, synchronization meetings, into your team design. And then lastly, we've got to think about integration. That integration, you know, the whole thing about integrating and testing, continual integration, quality at the end of each sprint, that all needs to be thought about, and we need to provide mechanisms and designs which will allow us to do that. Okay, so there we go. What I've done is I've talked you through some alternative ways of looking at teams. I've talked you through sort of trying to take you away from some of the, if you like, the rules that come out of things like SAFE and things like Scrum. I've tried to gone back to the Dunbar papers and said, you know, those really, are they applicable? Yes or no? The fact is, on team size, they are virtually the only thing that's available, but I'm not sure that comparing the size of a prehistoric village will actually relate to the size of a team in our current, you know, VUCA environment. So I think that there's some limitations in some of the rules of thumb that we use. Okay, so I've talked to you about, can we get travelers or ambassadors to try and do that? I've talked about primary and secondary teams to enable you to do that. So that basically is the content. All of this stuff now, all of the things I've talked to you about is available in the book. And some of you have been on my previous webinars. I've been saying the book's coming, the book's coming. It's here. And actually was launched on the 28th of May. So it's now available from Amazon. Some of the content of this webinar is in the book. Some of it is new stuff because working with BT, I've actually learned a lot more and so on with that. The other thing I'd say to you is we are going to be running a Developing Agile Coaches webinar training, which is a 14-week program, which is going to start in the autumn. And this content and lots of other content will be in that session. Okay, so I'll stop presenting now and ask you for questions. Anybody with any questions?
No questions, John, but it's very, very useful, and I think I'll be employing the traveller approach. Certainly.
Well, okay, Claire, that's great. I certainly will make sure that we've got the deck and stuff up on the website, so you can. I'll put it on the Teams on the event, so you can see it.
Perfect. Thank you, John.
All right, you're welcome. Anybody else?
Just ask the question. It's sort of like going off topic, John, but it sort of like relates back to the teams. Is the famous discussion around story points and velocity, right? And I think that's where I've seen in the past where I have to sort of like remind people that velocity, yeah, it's good for predictability, but it's all about working software. But when it comes down to like estimating stories and the camp that says no estimations, so what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, actually, I think that's a great thing. But I think what we'd do is if we could take that offline, would that be okay? I'm very happy to chat about it later if nobody else has got questions about this particular topic area. But I'd like to talk about, the team design stuff. But, velocity is something which is important, and I believe definitely there's some stuff there about meaningful metrics. And in fact, the next session that we've got, next one of these in the series, is about meaningful metrics.
Okay.
And you've got your hand up.
Yeah. Hey, John. Sorry, I couldn't find the mute button. So yeah, I just wanted to ask a question. You made a point around creating teams around value. Now that automatically strikes me as referring to maybe products and services. Would that be what you were referring to as an example? So if you have an organization that offer a number of products and services, building cross-functional teams around those products and services, would that be the kind of direction you were thinking of and going down?
It's one of the directions I would say to you. You remember I gave you the example of me buying some walking boots to go walking in the North Yorkshire moors and then the customer. So if you think about that process of me identifying that I need boots, me ordering the boots, them checking me that I'm a bona fide customer that I can pay, them then checking the inventory, then shipping it to me. There's a value stream there. That's the operational value stream. That's the organization is the way in which the organization generates cash, because an operational value stream has got money involved in it somewhere. And I'm not talking budget, I'm talking about revenue. So organizing a team to support that end-to-end process would be a starting point to actually deal with making sure that any changes we make improve that customer journey. And we're not doing, little bits of optimization. We're thinking about the whole end-to-end journey for that customer, and then using a team to actually fix various areas in that piece, in that map. So value stream mapping, most organizations might have 2 or 3 value streams that they would identify, and then you can organize around that.
That makes sense, and that at times could find itself to be organizing around products and services because you have a number of products to offer a value stream for a customer potentially.
Yeah, it could be.
Okay,
I mean,
makes sense.
there's an interesting bit of a debate I've had with some of the insurers. So, is the value stream the means of delivering the insurance policy, or is it actually the insurance policy itself? And you know, so are we using, if the same process is being used for delivering, let's say, health insurance and pet insurance, is that one value stream or two? There's a bit of nuance.
That's a really interesting point you made there, because I work for Compare the Market, right? And the way we've done our value streams is based on the product, so home insurance, car insurance. You know, that's what they're describing as the value stream, as the customer journey for that particular product. So that's kind of the way they've decided to do it.
Yeah. If you get hold of Craig Larman or Baz Vode, what they'll say to you is that in Go Compare, that's virtually one value stream. And what they would argue, if you look at the less stuff, now I'm not supporting this, I'm just telling you what they would say. They would say that you would have one product backlog that you then get all the teams to work from, irrespective of whether it was car insurance or pet insurance or health insurance or whatever, right? I think that gets too complicated for many people. I think most product owners really struggle with maintaining a decent backlog, as we were talking with Claire and Ash earlier, right? I think that, you know, how you split this up, you know, because it's not about the underwriting if you're looking, or it's not about, you know, passing the work from Go Compare out to the insurer. It's about how the operation works, and if there are different pieces, you might want to think about, is that one value stream or not, you know?
Interesting. Thank you.
There's if you've come across anything called the Vanguard method, I think there's a guy called John Sheldon, I think, and he uses he's got some materials around how do you start to pick off and improve a value stream, which, if you like, is the product owner tool set that could allow them to then start to define what they want the development teams to produce. It's really an interesting thing to do.
Noted. Thanks.
You're welcome.